Give me some sense as to your reaction to the study and what you've seen, frankly, from your own work as well.
So as a managing director of Illumen Capital, we're a private equity venture capital and growth fund of funds. And we work on applying evidence-based research to reduce implicit bias and unlock returns. So I think the big question that we ask is, over the last 30 years of emerging manager programs that have been touted as one of the ways that the industry can succeed, and including women and people of color managers, particularly Black managers, essentially we're at 1.3%, which is a dismal failure. So part of what we ask is, well, what's happening that is preventing this number from moving? It's over 52 years since Dr. King was killed, and for tying together these disparate pieces of economic justice and economic optimality. And people are willing, essentially, because of their biases, as our thesis points out, to accept lower returns due to their unconscious bias. So that's the key. And if we can reduce that, if we can make that a part of processes, then we can unlock returns.
Right. I mean, you would assume that they want to generate as high a return as they can. So how do you make them conscious, I guess, of their bias if, in fact, they're unconsciously making these decisions based on race?
The first thing we do is prove, as we did in the paper in collaboration with a lot of the leading Stanford professors in the world on implicit bias, social psychology, and portfolio allocation. We look at those strategies, and then we really dig in to helping them understand that we use measurement in every field of finance. It's not new. We know what a normal curve is. We know what we should be looking at in terms of the most talented people in the world. We're about underweighted $35 trillion in capital relative to what we'd expect by representation of women and people of color within the most talented asset allocation portfolios. And we help them to realize that if they aren't operating from that standpoint of proactively looking at that audience of top performing managers, then they've really kind of missed the boat. Typically, over the last 20 years, people have thought that this is a pipeline problem. And there are issues with the pipeline. However, what we proved is, even if you solve the pipeline problem, systematic bias at the asset allocation level will lead to suboptimal returns. We'll consistently overlook and underestimate the top performing managers, which is, as was mentioned before, kind of a big stain on people's desire to achieve their fiduciary duty for their university endowments, indeed for their foundations endowments, and indeed for sovereign wealth funds and pension funds.
Daryn, in the finance industry, have you personally experienced this bias firsthand?
I pitched 500 times over the last couple of years, and yeah, I experience it every day.
And you're also, in addition to being, in charge of a fund of funds, you're on the board of Ben & Jerry's, which made a lot of news for putting out a long and pointed statement around the issue of white supremacy, around the issue of social justice and the protests that we're seeing. What do you see as the responsibility of corporate America in this issue, especially as it relates to some of the key things that the protesters are calling for?
Yes, and as we look at Ben & Jerry's statement, the independent board of directors, of which I'm a part of, is a unique creature under the Unilever umbrella. So part of what we are responsible for is executing on the social, economic, and quality missions of the company. And that's an incredibly important role to align around what we're going to do to rise to meet the call of our values around racial equity and justice. And we're currently in that process as a board of setting lots of parameters and targets in collaboration with the management team in order to rout out structural racism and white supremacy within the company itself. And that's not a journey we began yesterday or 3 weeks ago. It's a journey that 4 years ago, the company was publicly in support of Black Lives Matter. And even before that has done a lot of things since its founding to continue this movement and be supportive of those on the front lines of really taking on these issues of white supremacy across the entire business and communities in which we operate. We're in 35 plus countries around the world. This is not simply a U.S. problem. And it needs not only protests, but it also needs proactively building towards a better and united world that includes having things like black suppliers, for supplier diversity, and systematically thinking across every aspect of a company's spend, growth, board, senior leadership team, et cetera, how we really route out these issues that prevent the outperformance of a company and overlook the humanity of so many people and human beings that are women and people of color throughout the global financial markets.